The knock on the front door was hard, rhythmic, and carried an undeniable air of authority. It was a Tuesday morning just past 10 o'clock. The Ohio sky was a dull, heavy gray, threatening rain. I was sitting at my kitchen island with a mug of black coffee, talking with my next-door neighbor Dave, when the sudden pounding broke the quiet of the house. Dave, who had spent 30 years as a detective for the Dayton Police Department, paused mid-sentence, his coffee cup hovering halfway to his mouth. We exchanged a look. You don't get to be in your late 60s without learning the difference between the friendly tap of a delivery driver and the aggressive rap of someone who believes they own the space they are standing in. I set my mug down, walked through the hallway, and looked through the glass sidelight of the front door. Standing on my porch was a man in a crisp, dark suit. He wore mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and his posture was rigid. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door inward, keeping the storm door between us. Before I could even offer a greeting, the man reached into his jacket, pulled out a black leather folder, and flipped it open. A silver badge caught the porch light. "Marcus Thorne?" he asked. His voice was flat, practiced, and cold. "I am," I replied, my hands instinctively tightening on the door handle. "I'm Agent Miller, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I'm here regarding an ongoing federal audit connected to your son-in-law's brokerage firm. We have a federal lien to temporarily seize the physical gold assets located on this property, pending investigation into unverified bullion." My stomach dropped into my shoes. He knew my name. He knew my son-in-law's profession. But far more terrifyingly, he knew about the gold. "I need you to step aside, Mr. Thorne, and take me to the basement safe," he commanded, reaching for the handle of the storm door. Before I could process the sheer impossibility of what he was saying, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. Dave had followed me from the kitchen. He stepped past me, pushing his large frame right up against the glass of the storm door. Dave didn't look at the man's face. He looked down at the leather folder still held up against the glass. He stared at it for about 3 seconds. Then Dave's eyes shifted to the man's belt, then to the collar of his shirt. "That's a nice piece of tin, son," Dave said, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly growl that I had never heard him use before. "Too bad FinCEN doesn't issue silver shields." The man in the suit stiffened, his mouth open to speak, but Dave didn't give him the chance. Dave grabbed the edge of my front door, yanked me backward by the shoulder, and slammed the heavy oak door shut with a force that rattled the picture frames in the hallway. He instantly threw the deadbolt and turned the secondary security latch. "Dave, what are you doing?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "He's a federal agent." "He's a guy in a cheap suit with a prop badge," Dave said, stepping away from the door and pulling his cell phone from his pocket. He didn't have a radio. His holster was empty, and federal treasury agents don't show up alone to seize high-value assets without local backup. "Somebody just tried to rob you, Marcus." I stood there in the quiet hallway, the reality of the moment washing over me like ice water. If that man was a fraud, a terrifying question remained. Only 3 people in the entire world knew about the floor safe buried in my basement, and only 3 people knew what was inside it: me, my daughter, and my son-in-law. Before I explain how this nightmare unraveled, let me ask you, where are you watching from today? And have you ever had trouble arrive at your front door completely uninvited? Let me know in the comments. My name is Marcus Thorne. I am 68 years old. I live in a quiet, older suburb of Dayton, Ohio, in a 4-bedroom brick house that I bought with my late wife Clara back in 1982. For 40 years, I worked as a precision machinist and quality control inspector for an aerospace contractor out near the Air Force Base. My entire professional life was dedicated to measuring tolerances down to a fraction of a human hair. I inspected turbine blades for jet engines. When you work in aerospace, you learn very quickly that assumptions get people killed. You don't guess. You measure. You verify. You look for the microscopic stress fractures that everyone else ignores. You look for the things that don't align. Clara passed away 4 years ago. It was a quiet, creeping illness that took her from me, and when she left the house felt entirely too large. But I stayed. The house was filled with her memory, with the life we had built, and I wasn't ready to let that go. We had one daughter, Sarah, who is now 34. Sarah is the absolute light of my life. She gave me my grandson, Leo, who is currently 7 years old, and possesses an energy that could power a small city. Over my 40-year career, Clara and I lived simply. We didn't take luxury vacations. We drove our cars until the wheels fell off, and we saved everything we could. But we didn't just save cash. Years ago, I read too many history books about inflation and currency collapse, and I decided to build a different kind of safety net. Every time we hit a savings milestone, I bought physical gold, specifically American Gold Eagle coins. I didn't talk about it. I didn't brag to my friends. I just quietly accumulated it over 3 decades. I bought a high-end commercial-grade floor safe, dug a hole in the concrete foundation of my basement machine shop, set the safe inside, and poured fresh concrete around it. I covered it with a heavy rubber fatigue mat. Inside that steel vault rested my life's work, Clara's sacrifice, and Sarah's future. It was a little over $150,000 in solid gold. It was meant to pay for Sarah's retirement one day, or Leo's college, or whatever emergency life threw at them after I was gone. It was my legacy, and I guarded it fiercely. Sarah married Greg 6 years ago. Greg was a polished, fast-talking financial advisor at a mid-sized brokerage firm downtown. He drove a European sedan, wore custom suits, and was always checking market fluctuations on his phone. I will admit I was hesitant about him at first. I am a man who creates physical things with my hands. Greg was a man who moved invisible numbers around on a screen, but he made Sarah happy. He was polite to Clara before Shast, and he seemed like a good provider. When you love your daughter, you make room in your heart for the man she chooses. You trust her judgment. A year ago, I decided it was time to let Sarah and Greg in on the secret. My health was good, but at my age, you realize that tomorrow is promised to absolutely no one. If my heart stopped in the middle of the night, I didn't want them selling the house to a flipper who would eventually discover a fortune buried in the basement floor. I sat them down in my living room, swore them to secrecy, and took them downstairs. I pulled back the heavy rubber mat, dialed the combination, and showed them the gold. Sarah was speechless. She cried, overwhelmed by what her mother and I had done for her. Greg's reaction, however, was different. He stared at the metal with a look I couldn't quite interpret at the time. It wasn't gratitude. It was calculation. He immediately started talking about yield inflation, erosion, and how that capital was dead equity, just sitting in the dark. He offered to take it off my hands, liquidate it, and put it into a high-growth mutual fund he managed. I politely but firmly declined. I told him the gold stays exactly where it is until I'm in the ground. I thought that was the end of it, but standing in my hallway with Dave listening to the sound of a fake federal agent driving away from my house, I realized the conversation a year ago had not been an end. It had been a beginning. Dave locked the deadbolt and turned to me. His face was deadly serious. "Marcus, who else knows about what you have downstairs?" "Just Sarah and Greg," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you absolutely sure?" Dave asked. "You haven't mentioned it at the hardware store. You didn't tell a drinking buddy. You didn't write it down on an insurance form." "No," I said. "No one, just the family." "Then we have a massive problem," Dave said quietly. "Because that guy wasn't guessing. He knew exactly what to ask for, and he knew it was in the basement." I needed to think. I told Dave I appreciated his help, but I needed a moment alone to process what had just happened. Dave nodded, told me to keep my doors locked, and went back to his house. I walked slowly through my quiet home, my mind racing back over the last few months. As a machinist, I am trained to look for micro-stresses. When a machine is about to fail, it rarely snaps all at once. It gives off warning signs, a slight vibration, a change in the sound of the motor, a microscopic crack in the metal. I began to review Greg's behavior over the past 90 days, looking for the cracks. And once I started looking, they were everywhere. 3 months ago, Greg stopped wearing his Rolex. When I asked him about it, he said it was at the jeweler for cleaning, but it never came back. 2 months ago, he traded in his expensive European sedan for a much older leased domestic car, claiming he was optimizing his monthly cash flow. But the biggest change was his demeanor. The confident, slick financial advisor had vanished. He was constantly sweating. He chewed his fingernails down to the quick. During our Sunday family dinners, he would excuse himself to the backyard multiple times to take hushed, frantic phone calls. And then there were the questions. A few weeks ago, Greg casually asked if I had ever updated my home security system. He asked if the basement windows had sensors on them. At the time, I thought he was just being a protective son-in-law. Then 2 weeks ago, he asked me if my memory had been slipping lately. He brought it up in front of Sarah, claiming I had repeated a story twice. He suggested I might need to see a neurologist. I brushed it off, but Sarah had looked concerned. I walked down the wooden stairs into my basement workshop. The air smelled of cutting fluid oil and old wood. It was my sanctuary. I walked over to the workbench, turned on the bright overhead fluorescent lights, and looked down at the rubber fatigue mat covering the safe. If someone knew the gold was here, they had to have information. I stepped off the mat and grabbed my heavy high-lumen machinist's inspection flashlight from the workbench. I got down on my hands and knees. I didn't just look at the safe. I looked at the environment around it. I scanned the concrete floor. I checked the dust patterns. Then, I aimed the beam of light upward, tracing the ceiling joists above the safe. My eyes moved slowly, methodically, inspecting every inch of the exposed wood, the electrical conduit, and the HVAC ductwork. Then I saw it, tucked neatly into the dark, recessed corner of the aluminum return air duct. Perfectly camouflaged by the shadows was a tiny black square, no larger than a postage stamp. A thin, hair-like wire ran from the square, taped flat against the aluminum, disappearing into a gap in the floorboards above. I pulled a step stool over, climbed up, and looked closer. It was a micro camera. The lens was angled precisely downward, pointing dead center at the dial of my floor safe. My breath caught in my throat. I had opened that safe twice in the last month to add a few coins I had purchased. Whoever placed this camera had watched me. They had recorded me turning the dial. They had the combination. What would you have done in my place? Would you have ripped the camera out immediately, confronted your family, or kept quiet to see who was watching? My first instinct, my furious fatherly instinct, was to tear the wire out of the ceiling, smash the camera with a hammer, and drive straight to Greg's office. I wanted to grab him by the collar of his cheapened suits and demand to know what he had done. But my professional training took over. You do not fix a broken machine by hitting it blindly. You gather data. You find the root cause of the failure. If I destroyed the camera now, the watcher would know they were discovered. They would panic. They would hide their tracks, and worse, they might twist the narrative. I had no solid proof. Greg put it there. If I accused him without evidence, he would deny it, and Sarah would be caught in the middle. I would look like a paranoid old man, making wild accusations. I climbed down from the step stool. I left the camera exactly where it was. I walked upstairs, picked up my phone, and called Dave. 10 minutes later, Dave was in my living room with a black canvas bag. I told him what I had found in the basement. He didn't seem surprised, he just looked grim. He pulled a digital radio frequency scanner from his bag and went downstairs. I stayed upstairs watching the street. When Dave returned, he had a notepad in his hand. "It's a Wi-Fi-enabled spy camera," Dave said softly. "It doesn't record to a local memory card. It streams directly to a cloud server, and it's using your home internet network to do it. The signal is bouncing right off your living room router." "Can you trace who is receiving it?" I asked. "I can't trace the cloud account without a warrant," Dave explained. "But I can log into your home router and see what devices are connected to your network. If the person who planted this camera set it up, their device's digital fingerprint, their MAC address might be logged in your router's history." Dave sat at my kitchen table, opened his laptop, and logged into my router's administrative page. I watched over his shoulder as lines of data scrolled across the screen. He filtered the connected devices. "There," Dave pointed to the screen. "That unknown IP addresses the camera. And look at the device that initially configured it to your network. It's an Apple iPad. Named G. Thorn Pad." Greg. The cold reality settled over me like a heavy winter blanket. The man who sat at my dining room table, who kissed my daughter's cheek, who bounced my grandson on his knee, had secretly wired my home to steal my life savings. "Dave," I said, my voice remarkably steady, despite the storm raging in my chest. "I need to know what kind of trouble Greg is in. If he's risking federal prison to rob his father-in-law, he must be desperate. Can you look into him?" Dave nodded. "I have a buddy who works as a forensic accountant for the State Fraud Division. Let me make a phone call. It might take a day or two." I thanked Dave, and he left. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair in the dark living room, staring at the wall, feeling a profound sense of failure. I had allowed the wolf into the house. I had served him dinner. I had handed him the map to the flock. 2 days later, Dave returned. He carried a manila folder, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "It's bad, Marcus," Dave said, pulling a stack of papers from the folder. "Greg isn't a wealth manager anymore. He hasn't been for 3 months. His firm quietly terminated him after an internal audit found he had been trading on heavy, unauthorized margin in offshore cryptocurrency markets. He lost everything. He's completely wiped out. His bank accounts are frozen. His credit cards are maxed. And he is facing a massive tax liability. They didn't press criminal charges because he agreed to forfeit his deferred compensation. but he owes private lenders hundreds of thousands of dollars. Dangerous lenders, men who don't send polite letters when you miss a payment. I looked at the documents. It was a complete financial autopsy of a man who had destroyed his own life through greed and arrogance. But the worst was yet to come. "There's something else," Dave said gently, pulling one final document from the back of the folder. "My buddy found this filed in the county probate court system 3 days ago. It's a petition." I took the paper. The legal jargon blurred together for a moment, but then the crucial words snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. It was a petition for emergency medical guardianship and power of attorney. The petitioner was Greg. The proposed ward was me. I read the attached affidavit signed by Greg under penalty of perjury. He claimed that I was showing severe signs of early-onset dementia. He claimed I was paranoid, disoriented, and incapable of managing my own finances. He stated that I had recently begun giving away large sums of money to strangers and scammers. The sheer malice of the plan hit me with the force of a physical blow. The breath rushed out of my lungs, and I had to sit down at the kitchen table. This wasn't just a robbery. This was a complete, calculated destruction of my life. Greg's plan was brilliant in its cruelty. He hired a fake federal agent to come to my house and intimidate me. He assumed that I, an old man, would be terrified of the federal government and would open the safe and hand over the gold. Greg would then intercept the gold, pay off his massive debts, and keep himself out of prison. But that was only phase 1. Phase 2 was the true betrayal. Once the gold was gone, Greg was going to go to Sarah and the courts. He was going to use the incident as proof that I was mentally incompetent. He would say, "Look, Sarah, your father just handed his entire life savings to a man in a fake suit. He's losing his mind. We need to step in and take control of his assets before he loses the house too." He was going to use the crime he orchestrated to steal my independence, my dignity, and the home Clara and I had built. He was going to gaslight my daughter into believing her father was a broken, confused old man who needed to be locked away in a care facility. I sat there, in the silence of my kitchen, staring at Greg's signature on the document. I felt a deep, overwhelming wave of grief. I grieved for Sarah, who was married to a monster. I grieved for little Leo, and I felt a burning, terrible shame that I had allowed myself to be targeted. But then the grief faded. It receded like the tide leaving behind cold, hard, exposed rock. The machinist in me woke up. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I calmly handed the papers back to Dave. "He doesn't know the fake agent failed," I said. "He doesn't know Dave chased him off before he could get in." "No," Dave agreed. "The guy probably ran off and told Greg the door got locked in his face. Greg knows plan A failed." "Which means?" I said, looking toward the basement door. "He has the combination to my safe. He knows the gold is still down there, and he is running out of time. He's going to come for it himself. We need to call the police, Marcus, right now. We show them the camera, we show them the router logs. We can get a warrant." "No," I said firmly. "If we call the police now, what do we actually have? We have a camera that he can claim he installed for my protection because he thought I was losing my mind. We have a probate petition that isn't illegal to file. And we have an unidentified man who knocked on my door and walked away. A good defense attorney will spin this into a misunderstanding. Greg will tell Sarah he was just trying to protect the family assets. He'll plant the seed of doubt in her mind. I will not allow that. I need him to expose exactly what he is, in a way that neither the police nor my daughter can ever deny." "What are you going to do?" Dave asked. "I'm going to let him steal it," I said. I spent the next 2 days in my basement machine shop. I didn't sleep. I fueled myself with black coffee and a cold, singular focus. First, I drove to an industrial metal supplier on the other side of the county. I purchased heavy rods of industrial tungsten. Tungsten is a fascinating metal. It is incredibly dense, incredibly hard, and notoriously difficult to machine. But its most important characteristic for my purposes was its specific gravity. The density of pure gold is 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter. The density of industrial tungsten is 19.25. To the human hand, to the naked eye, and even to a standard scale, the weight difference is completely indistinguishable. I chucked the tungsten rods into my heavy-duty metal lathe. The sound of the carbide cutting tool biting into the dense metal filled the basement. I turned the rods down until their diameter perfectly matched the diameter of a stack of 1-ounce American Gold Eagle coins. I cut them into identical lengths. It was grueling exact work. It required constant lubrication and precise measurement with my digital calipers. Every piece had to be flawless. When the tungsten cylinders were finished, I wrapped them tightly in the heavy paper coin wrappers I had saved over the years. I sealed the ends. I now had 24 heavy identical rolls that felt exactly like a fortune in gold. I opened the floor safe. I removed the real gold coins, packed them into an unmarked steel toolbox, and drove them to a secure private bank vault downtown. I rented a safety deposit box and locked my family's future safely away, behind steel and armed guards. When I returned home, I placed the tungsten rolls into the basement floor safe. I stacked them exactly as the real gold had been stacked. I locked the safe, spun the dial, and covered it with the mat. Then, I went to a local electronics store and bought 3 high-definition, motion-activated security cameras with audio recording capabilities. I didn't hide them. I mounted them in plain sight in the basement, but I angled them to cover the stairs, the workbench, and the floor safe. The trap was set. Now I needed the bait. I called Sarah and invited her and Greg over for a Sunday afternoon barbecue. I told them I was feeling a bit overwhelmed and just wanted some family time. When they arrived, Greg was visibly vibrating with tension. He looked exhausted. His eyes were darting around the house, and he forced a tight, artificial smile whenever I looked at him. After dinner, while Sarah was in the backyard playing catch with Leo, I asked Greg to help me carry some dishes into the kitchen. I leaned against the counter, deliberately letting my shoulders slump. I made my voice sound a little shaky, a little tired. "Greg," I said quietly, looking at the floor, "something strange happened a few days ago. A man came to the house. He said he was from the government. He was asking about the safe downstairs." Greg froze. A flicker of panic followed immediately. By predatory focus flashed across his eyes. "What, Dad? What did you do? Did you let him in?" "No," I lied, keeping my voice wavering. "I got confused. I didn't know what to do, so I just locked the door and hid in the bedroom until he left." "But it scared me, Greg. It really scared me." "Dad, you shouldn't be living alone," Greg said smoothly, slipping instantly into his rehearsed drawl. He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to break his wrist. "You're getting confused. Your memory isn't what it used to be. It's dangerous for you to have those kinds of assets in the house. Anyone could take advantage of you." "I know," I whispered, looking up at him with wide, vulnerable eyes. "You're right. I was foolish to keep it here. I called a secure transport company. They are coming tomorrow morning at 9 to pack up the safe and move the contents to a federal depository in Cincinnati. It won't be in the house anymore." Greg's jaw tightened. He calculated the timeline. Tomorrow morning meant his window was closing permanently. "But Greg," I added, rubbing my forehead as if I had a headache, "I did something stupid. I went down there earlier to check on things and my arthritis was acting up so badly. I couldn't get the dial to spin properly to lock it back. I just threw the mat over it. I'm going to have to leave it unlocked tonight. Do you think it will be safe just for one night?" Imagine looking the man who was trying to destroy you in the eye, knowing exactly what he is, and handing him the rope. Could you keep a straight face? Greg's eyes dilated. He had the combination from his hidden camera, but an unlocked safe removed the final barrier. It was too easy. It was exactly what a desperate man needed to hear. "Don't worry, Dad," Greg said softly, squeezing my shoulder. "It'll be perfectly safe. I'll make sure of it." They left an hour later. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I called Dave. "He took the bait," I said. "He's coming tonight." Dave came over through the backyard. He was carrying his concealed carry weapon, not because we intended to use it, but because Greg was desperate, and desperate men are unpredictable. We turned off all the lights on the main floor. We sat in the dark living room watching the live feed from my new basement security cameras on Dave's tablet. We didn't have to wait long. At 2:30 in the morning, a pair of headlights cut down the alley behind my house. The lights turned off, and a car rolled silently into the gravel spot behind my detached garage. A few moments later, the motion light near my back patio flared to life. On the tablet screen, we saw Greg. He was dressed in dark clothes, carrying a heavy leather duffel bag. He bypassed the back door completely. He knew about the old coal chute window that led directly into the basement. I had deliberately left the interior latch unhooked. We watched the tablet screen as the basement window slowly slid open. Greg lowered himself quietly into my machine shop. He clicked on a small pen light, holding it in his mouth. He moved with panicked, frantic energy. He went straight to the rubber fatigue mat, grabbed the edge, and threw it back. He reached down to the dial of the floor safe. He gave the heavy steel handle a tug. Because I had disengaged the locking bolts, the heavy door swung open smoothly on its hinges. Greg dropped to his knees. The camera caught the absolute relief on his face. He unzipped his leather duffel bag. He reached into the dark cavity of the safe and began pulling out the heavy paper-wrapped rolls of tungsten. He was moving so fast, blinded by greed and adrenaline, that he didn't even question the weight. He just kept stacking them into his bag. 1 roll, 5 rolls, 10, 20. When the safe was empty, he zipped the duffel bag shut. He stood up, breathing heavily, hoisting the massive weight of the bag over his shoulder by the strap. He turned back toward the window. That was when I hit the switch at the top of the stairs, flooding the entire basement with blinding fluorescent light. Greg dropped the bag. It hit the concrete floor with a deafening metallic thud. He spun around, shielding his eyes from the sudden brightness. Dave and I walked slowly down the wooden stairs. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. Greg's mind scrambled to find an excuse. He held up his hands, his face pale and sweating. Dad, listen. I'm sorry I startled you. I couldn't sleep. I was so worried about the safe being unlocked, I came over to secure it for you. I was going to hold on to it at my house until the transport company arrived tomorrow. I was just trying to protect you. I walked across the basement floor until I was standing 10 feet away from him. Dave stood by the stairs, his arms crossed, his phone held up, recording every word. Protect me, I repeated, my voice devoid of any emotion. Yes, Greg insisted, taking a step forward. Dad, you know your memory is slipping. You left the safe unlocked. Anyone could have walked in here. I'm your family. I'm looking out for you. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I tossed it onto the workbench next to him. Is that what this is, Greg? I asked. Is this you looking out for me? Greg glanced down at the paper. It was a copy of the probate petition he had filed to declare me mentally incompetent. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from his face. You sent a fake federal agent to my door, I said, taking another step forward. My voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. You wired my house with a hidden camera. You lied to my daughter. You planned to steal my savings, pay off your offshore gambling debts, and then use the theft to lock me away in a home so you could steal this house too. Dad, no, you don't understand. I understand exactly what you are, I interrupted, pointing a finger at his chest. You looked at an old man and you saw a victim. You thought, because I have gray hair, because my hands are calloused, because I don't wear a suit to work, that I was stupid. You thought you could gaslight me into believing I was losing my mind. Greg was shaking now. He looked at the window, then at Dave, who was standing like a brick wall blocking the stairs. Greg realized he was trapped. The smooth-talking financial advisor was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. Please, Marcus, Greg begged, his voice cracking. Please. They're going to kill me. The people I owe money to, they don't care about the law. I need the gold. I'll pay you back, I swear. Just let me take it. You have to let me take it. He lunged for the leather duffel bag on the floor. He grabbed the handles and tried to lift it, preparing to make a run for the window. I didn't stop him. I just watched him. Take it, Greg, I said softly. He paused, looking at me with wild confusion. I said, take it. Go ahead. Pay off your debts with it. Greg looked down at the bag. He looked back at me. A deep, sinking suspicion finally penetrated his panic. He unzipped the bag. He reached inside and pulled out one of the heavy paper-wrapped rolls. He tore the paper open. The dull gray machined surface of the tungsten cylinder caught the fluorescent light. Greg stared at it. He dropped it. It clattered loudly against the concrete. He tore open another roll. More gray metal. He fell to his knees, frantically ripping the paper off, roll after roll, his breath coming in ragged gasps, surrounded by useless, heavy slugs of industrial metal. I picked up a pair of digital calipers from my workbench and tossed them onto the floor next to his knees. Measure them, Greg, I said coldly. Well, the tolerances are perfect, within 1/1000th of an inch. But it's tungsten, at $50 a rod. The real gold has been sitting inside a bank vault downtown for 3 days. Greg dropped his face into his hands and began to sob. It was a pathetic, broken sound. He had gambled his family, his freedom, and his soul, and he had lost to a man he believed was too old to fight back. Dave, I said, turning away from the miserable pile on the floor, call your friends at the department. Tell them we have a break-in. The aftermath was painful, but necessary. When the police arrived, they arrested Greg for breaking and entering. When Dave handed the detectives the folder with the router logs, the hidden camera evidence, and the probate petition, The charges escalated to attempted grand larceny, wiretapping, and elder fraud. The hardest part of the entire ordeal was calling Sarah the next morning. I drove to her house, sat her down at her kitchen table, and showed her the video of her husband sneaking into my basement to steal my life savings. I showed her the legal documents where he claimed I was losing my mind. Sarah broke down. She wept for hours. She had been betrayed by the man she loved, manipulated into doubting her own father's sanity. But she is my daughter, and she has steel in her spine. By the end of the week, she had filed for divorce and applied for full custody of Leo. Greg's lenders eventually caught wind of his arrest, with his assets frozen by the fraud investigation and criminal charges pending. He was left with absolutely nothing. He tried to offer the police the name of the fake federal agent he had hired in exchange for a lighter sentence. The police picked the man up, a low-level enforcer with a long record, but it didn't save Greg from the consequences of his actions. He was sentenced to 5 years in a state facility for the fraud and wiretapping charges. Sarah and Leo moved into my house while she navigated the divorce proceedings. The house that had felt so large and empty after Clara passed was suddenly filled with life again. Leo's toys scattered across the living room rug, the sound of his laughter echoing down the hallway. A few months later, things settled into a new normal. I am back in my basement machine shop. I still turn metal on my lathe. I still measure to the 1,000th of an inch, but my safe is empty now. I left it unlocked, a heavy iron monument to a lesson learned. When you get older, the world tends to look right through you. People assume that because you walk a little slower, or because you don't understand every new app on a smartphone, that your mind has gone soft. They mistake kindness for weakness. They mistake patience for confusion. But experience is a currency that doesn't lose its value. I spent 40 years learning how to detect failures before they happen. I learned that true strength isn't in screaming or throwing a punch. True strength is in the quiet preparation. It is in knowing the exact weight of what you are protecting and refusing to let anyone, even family, take away your dignity. Sarah is thriving now. She has a new job, and she and Leo are safe. The gold remains in the bank vault, waiting for the day they truly need it. But I realized something profound during this ordeal. The gold was never the true legacy. The true legacy was the ability to protect my family from the wolves, even when the wolf was wearing a custom suit and sitting at my own dinner table. Has someone you trusted ever made you question everything you thought you knew about them? Let me know in the comments. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe or return for another story. Thank you for listening.